The air was thick with dust, remnants of shattered buildings that once stood tall and proud over the city. Now they lay in crumbled ruins, their stones scattered across the streets like forgotten memories of a time before the war. The people moved like shadows, their faces hardened by loss, their bodies tired from the endless work of rebuilding what had been destroyed. Liam stood at the edge of what was once the city's grand plaza, gazing at the destruction. The statue of his great-grandfather, a symbol of his family's power and influence, was now toppled, its head lying in the dirt. It was a cruel metaphor for the fall of everything his family had once represented. Yet, as he looked out at the broken buildings and the people working tirelessly to piece them back together, a strange sense of guilt gnawed at him. His father had been a key political figure during the war, one who had promised prosperity, but had instead left the city in ruins. Further away, Elena lifted a brick from the rubble, her hands raw from the labor. The war had taken everything from her family, her home, her brother, and her father's livelihood. Now all that remained were endless days of trying to rebuild a life from the ashes. The wealthier families, like Liam's, had suffered far less, their mansions still standing at the city's edge, untouched by the bombs that had devastated her neighborhood. There was a bitter resentment in her heart, one that she carried silently as she worked. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the ruined city, their paths crossed for the first time. Liam was there on behalf of his family, overseeing the reconstruction efforts. Elena, lost in her work, barely noticed him at first, but when she did, her gaze lingered just long enough to make him uncomfortable. He knew her type, one of the countless civilians whose lives had been shattered, and whose anger now pointed squarely at families like his. She saw him as a symbol of everything wrong with the city, and he could feel the weight of that judgment. Neither spoke, but in that brief moment, an invisible thread seemed to tie them together, something unspoken, born from the shared devastation of the war. Yet, both quickly turned away, each silently returning to their own world, not knowing that this would not be the last time they crossed paths. The city was slowly stirring back to life, though the cracks in its foundations still ran deep. People gathered in what was left of the market square, pulling the debris from underfoot, their hands stained with dirt and soot. Liam had been placed in charge of coordinating volunteers, though the task felt more symbolic than useful. As he surveyed the scene, his gaze caught Elena again, this time not from a distance. She was standing only a few feet away, her face drawn in concentration as she hoisted a broken slab of concrete. Dust clung to her skin, but there was no denying her resolve. Liam hesitated. He had seen her once before, but something about her presence unsettled him, though he couldn't pinpoint why. Elena noticed him almost immediately, though she said nothing. It had been hard not to, given that Liam's family name had circulated through her life in whispers and shouts for years. To her, he represented everything she despised, the wealth, the power, the untouched luxury of his life, even in war. But she wasn't a child anymore. Anger had dulled into bitterness, and bitterness had worn her down into something colder. As the afternoon passed, they worked in proximity, never speaking, until the sound of crumbling stone cracked through the air. One of the remaining market walls, weakened by months of neglect, collapsed. Elena stumbled backward, the debris shifting under her feet. The world spun in a haze of dust and panic. A hand shot out from the blur, Liam's hand, steady and firm, pulling her away just as a chunk of stone fell where she had been standing. Her heart raced as she caught her breath, her gaze meeting his for the first time. There was a flicker of something, fear, gratitude, maybe even recognition. "Are you hurt?" Liam asked, his voice low but urgent. His hand still lingered on her arm, their closeness suddenly more palpable than the chaos around them. Elena shook her head, quickly pulling away as if burned. "No, I'm fine." Her words came out sharper than intended, But she didn't soften them. She refused to accept help from someone like him. Liam let her go, but as she turned back to the work, brushing herself off, he felt a strange pull. An invisible thread still tied them together, fragile yet undeniable. In the weeks that followed, the city's wounds began to heal, slowly, painfully, but surely. Everywhere people gathered, clearing rubble and laying the first stones of a future they could barely imagine. Elena and Liam continued to cross paths, sometimes deliberately avoiding each other, sometimes merely pretending they hadn't noticed. But the connection between them had begun to take root. It was subtle, growing in the quiet moments where neither spoke, but both felt the weight of the other's presence. They worked in silence, sharing glances that lasted just a second too long, feeling the tension that neither of them was willing to acknowledge. One afternoon, they found themselves alone in what was left of the old library, one of the few places that still held some semblance of its former self. Books lay scattered across the floor, pages torn and weathered by time, but a few shelves had survived. Elena held up a tattered volume, studying it with a mix of reverence and sadness. "You must think it's strange," she said quietly. "Someone like me trying to save what's left of this place." Liam glanced over at her, surprised she had spoken. He had been sorting through broken stone and glass, unsure how to fill the silence. "I don't think it's strange at all," he said, moving closer. "These books, they're part of the city's history. They're worth saving." She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. His face, often distant and unreadable, now carried an unexpected sincerity. She could almost see the weight he carried, the burden of being tied to a family that had played a part in destroying what she held dear. "My father used to bring me here," she admitted, sitting down on the steps with the book in her lap. "He said knowledge was the only thing that could survive war. He was wrong." Liam sat beside her, though a respectful distance away. He could feel the fragility of the moment, as if one wrong word would shatter it. "My family never came here," he said quietly, ashamed of how shallow that admission sounded. They were too caught up in politics. Power was always more important than knowledge to them. For a long moment they sat in silence, the only sound the soft rustling of paper in the breeze. The air between them shifted from one of guarded tension to something quieter, more understanding. Neither of them said it, but in that stillness, the wall between them began to crumble. As the sunlight streamed through the cracks in the library's ceiling, they rose to leave. Their hands brushed, just briefly, but the touch lingered in both their minds long after. They didn't speak of it, but something had undeniably changed. The fragile peace that had begun to bloom between Liam and Elena was abruptly shattered the evening their families discovered their growing connection. It started like all things in the city, whispers, rumors. In a world so divided by war and loyalty, such things had a way of spreading fast. It wasn't long before Elena's mother confronted her, eyes wide with disbelief. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice barely controlled. "You've been seen with Liam, of all people, after everything his family has done?" Elena's breath hitched and she could feel her defenses rising. She had expected this confrontation, but was still unprepared for the depth of her mother's fury. "Mama, you don't understand. It's not like that. Not like that." Her mother's voice was trembling, filled with rage. "His family is responsible for the suffering of people like us. And you dare to think there's a place for you with them?" Elena flinched but didn't retreat. "He's not his father. Don't defend him." Her mother's words were a whip. "You have no idea what you're playing with." Elena fled to her room, her heart a twisted knot of loyalty, guilt, and love. As the door closed behind her, the walls felt like they were closing in too. Liam faced a similar confrontation at home. His father, cold and furious, had caught wind of the connection through his network of acquaintances. "You're throwing away everything," his father spat, pacing the room. "Do you know what that girl's family represents? They blame us for the war, and you—" "They're right." Liam's voice was quiet but firm, surprising even himself. "You did leave people like them behind. But I won't." His father's face hardened. "You're making a mistake, and it will cost you everything. There's no place for her in our world." But in his heart, Liam knew there was no turning back. He couldn't live in the same world his father had built. Not anymore. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Elena and Liam, torn apart by their family's disapproval, found themselves weighed down by the decisions they had yet to make. The city was healing, but they were broken. Elena threw herself into her work at the reconstruction sites, but it felt hollow without Liam's presence. Each day she saw echoes of what they had built in those brief moments, an unspoken understanding. Her mother's words still cut deep, but so did the memory of Liam's quiet kindness. For Liam, the burden was just as heavy. His father's warnings echoed in his mind, but so did the undeniable truth. He couldn't live in a world built on old grudges. He missed Elena, missed the way she had looked at him as if he were more than his name. The more he thought of her, the more he realized that this wasn't just about their families. It was about who they were, who they wanted to become. One evening, as dusk settled over the city, Liam made his decision. He would not let his family's history define his future. He found Elena in the old market square, sitting on the same steps where they had first shared their silent connection. "I can't do this anymore," Liam said softly, standing before her. "I can't pretend what we have doesn't matter. I'm choosing you." Elena looked up, her heart both breaking and healing in that single moment. "I don't want to hurt them," she whispered, her voice trembling, "but I can't lose you." They sat together in the fading light, the future uncertain, but one thing clear: they would not live their lives shackled by the past. The days following their decision were filled with uncertainty, but for the first time, Liam and Elena felt a strange sense of peace. They had chosen each other, and that was a kind of victory, even if it came at a cost. Word of their defiance spread quickly through the city, stirring both support and discontent. Liam's father, angered by his son's refusal to obey, issued an ultimatum: abandon Elena or be disinherited. Elena's family, less wealthy but no less proud, made their own feelings clear. She would no longer be welcome in their home if she continued down this path. But amidst the hostility, something remarkable began to happen. The sight of Liam and Elena, standing together despite their family's enmity, became a symbol for a city tired of division. Their love wasn't just about them anymore. It was about a future where hate and blame no longer ruled. One evening, the two families were forced into the same space, an event in the newly rebuilt town square. Tension hung thick in the air, but as Liam and Elena stood side by side, hand in hand, something shifted. Neither family was ready to forgive, but neither could ignore the strength of what their children had built together. The chains of the past began to loosen, slowly but surely. The city around them mirrored their journey, bruised, scarred, but healing. As they walked through the streets, Liam and Elena knew that their love had not only survived, but had become something far stronger than the hate that had once threatened to tear them apart. As Liam and Elena walked through the streets, hand in hand, the city around them slowly healing, they knew they had chosen the harder path, one that defied hatred, defied old wounds, and embraced hope. Their love was not easy, but it was real, and in its strength they found the power to rebuild not just their lives, but the lives of those around them. The lesson we can take from their story is simple but profound. Sometimes the walls that divide us, whether they are built from political beliefs, social class, or the scars of the past, are just that, walls. And while walls are strong, they are not indestructible. With love, understanding, and the courage to choose a different path, we can break through those barriers and rebuild something stronger, something better. No matter how broken the world may seem, there is always the potential for healing and unity. In the end, it is love, imperfect, fragile but resilient, that has the power to overcome even the deepest divides. I hope this story inspired you. Please feel free to leave a comment with your thoughts, suggestions, or ideas for future stories. I would love to hear what kind of narratives you'd like to explore next, whether it's more tales of forbidden love, stories of personal growth, or even something entirely different. And don't forget to follow the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. I appreciate your support, and I'm excited to share many more adventures and romance with you. It's